Hi, everyone. Welcome to An Unlikely Story, our virtual event this evening with Denise Heinze. My name is Kim Havens, and I'm joining you here from our conference room in Plainville. I'm so excited to have you. During the event, if you lose your picture or your sound at all, just go ahead and refresh your browser, and it should bring you right back in. Denise Heinze, a former literature professor and a PhD graduate of Duke University, writes fiction, nonfiction, and poetry. She's the author of a scholarly work on Toni Morrison and the eco-thriller Sally St. John's. Her story, The Grid, was a quarterfinalist for the Ghost Story Supernatural Fiction Award. The Brief and True Report of Temperance FLOWERDEW is her second novel and was a finalist for the University of New Orleans Press Publishing Lab Prize. A descendant of Louisa May Alcott, she joins us this evening from North Carolina. Denise is going to talk about The Brief and True Report of Temperance FLOWERDEW, a historical novel that takes place in Jamestown, Virginia, America's first colony in 1609. Determined to set the historical record straight and clear her conscience, Temperance FLOWERDEW, the wife of Virginia's first two governors, puts quill to paper recounting the hardship that nearly brought the Jamestown colony to its knees and the extraordinary sacrifice of her servant girl, Lily. It alternates between Temperance's journal and the backstory of how she came aboard the Falcon in England to sail to the distant shores of the New World. She brings Lily as her personal servant, who is running away from accusations. It's the story of the friendship between the two women and how they navigate a brutal time of starvation and Indian hostilities at the very beginning of American history. The history is absolutely fascinating, but it's really the relationship between Temperance and Lily that makes the novel so unforgettable. And now it is my pleasure to welcome Denise Heinze. Hi, Denise.
Hi, Kim. Thank you so much. Wonderful introduction.
Thank you. It is so nice to be able to talk. And here is your book. It is absolutely gorgeous. I do highly, and we do have signed actual copies of your book. So I forgot to mention in the intro, if you would like your very own copy, please click the green button down below. So what inspired you to write about this particular time and place in history?
It really was fairly mundane. But before I get into that, thank you so much to An Unlikely Story for hosting this event. I went online and I looked at your website and I saw the bookstore and I just said, oh my goodness, that is the ideal quintessential bookstore. And one of these days I'm going to get there. So it's one of those the places you don't want to miss, especially if you're a bookstore lover, and because it's just so quaint and really quite lovely.
It really is a magical place. It's my happy place.
It was really mundane how I came up with the idea. I mean, as a writer, you just always have your eyes and your ears open for something that's going to really tweak your interest and get you writing. And I just lucked out, and I happened to be watching a documentary on the History Channel about Jamestown and the starving time. And it was so compelling and so fascinating that, as so often happens when I come across something that does that to me, I wanted to learn more. So I went online and searched for more information about Jamestown, ran into a woman named Temperance FLOWERDEW I'd never heard of, even though I taught early American literature, which includes history, for many years. So here's this American pioneer I didn't know anything about. Yeah. And I continued to do my research. Then I came across a recent article, maybe a few years ago, about an archaeological dig at Jamestown, in which the skeletal remains of a young girl had been found just off the kitchen compost. And at that moment, it was the aha moment, the Eureka Phenomenon. And I said, this is it. I have to write about this. It's calling out to me.
Yeah, I went down the well today of going on the Jamestown.org website and like, oh, so I completely get it. And how much research did you have to do? And were you able to visit Jamestown?
I did go to Jamestown, and I was at the original site. There is a reconstruction nearby that I stayed away from because I had already started to conceive of the village in my head, so I didn't want that to interfere with my vision. I'll go there someday,
Yeah.
but I just pretty much stayed at the original site. And in the interim, I read a number of histories and scholarly articles about Jamestown until I reached a point where I just knew I had enough, and there wasn't a whole lot further to go in terms of what I needed to find out. And the rest was really up to my imagination because there was so little about Temperance Flowerdew and absolutely nothing about Lily.
Wow. Well, and she must have been. I mean, you think like she was married to the first two governors. Like she
Right.
had to be a pistol. You know?
Yeah, she was amazing and so young when she went to Jamestown. And we're not sure if she went alone or if she may have had a previous husband, but the historical record is unclear on that point. But yeah, she was. You would think there had been more about her. And I'm just hoping that someday someone will buy some old house in Virginia and in the walls will find the actual report of Temperance Flowerdew.
That would be so cool. And I have a house that was built in 1783, and we
Whoa.
have found some really cool things. Like, especially we dug out underneath the dining room, which had to have been like out the back door where they threw things. And, you know, so we found little shoe leather and razors and cool things in the wall. So yes, I will. That would be really cool.
Any letters or notes or manuscripts yet?
Well, we did find a hidden closet when we redid the bathroom, but it was from 1958. And there was actually a typewritten note from a young man that said this secret closet was sealed up in 1958. There was a fire. It was really cool. And his brother actually came to the house randomly when my husband was outside and said, "Oh yeah, that was my brother." So it's very cool.
Where's the secret closet?
It's in the bathroom. Like it's behind the mantle. And there were shelves in there. It was all like, yeah, so we left it exposed. It's really cool.
Wow.
The hidden closet.
There's a story there.
Yeah. We were like, oh, is there anything in there? It's pretty cool. There was an old shaving cream that was in a metal tube. So that was kind of cool. And a whole bunch of newspapers. Gosh. So you wrote it from the point of view of Temperance and Lily,
Right.
when most of the historical records are written by men.
Right.
So how did you go about making their voice? Because it's very much of that time. Like you didn't write in a modern voice for them, yet it's uniquely their own. And I have to say, I love the relationship between the two.
Thank you.
It's so good.
Yeah. I had to access a lot of different materials from that time period because people didn't all speak the same way. They came from different socioeconomic classes, and some people talk like Shakespeareans, some talk like Puritans, and some like working class people.
Right.
So I read a lot of the reports and journals of the male settlers, and of course the literature of the day, the highbrow literature, and I just attached a voice to each character based on how I thought they might speak. I'll never know if I'm right, but see, that's the beauty of writing a novel. There's really no right or wrong, I guess.
Right. And so can you talk a little bit about your path to publishing? Because I'm thinking it's not the traditional path, and your writing is from a lot of different genres. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I started off writing scholarship because I was a university professor in the publisher parish. And I was a Toni Morrison scholar. I very early on, before Toni Morrison became a Nobel Prize winning icon, superwoman. And I wrote a book about her as a result of my dissertation at Duke University, and it was published by the University of Georgia Press. And then eventually I started to gravitate toward fiction and creative nonfiction. And I decided that that's the path I wanted to take. And so I did something that people consider as professional suicide. I resigned from a tenure track position and took a sort of a 3.5 year hiatus from academia and learned how to write fiction. And then I went back to teaching at North Carolina State University and continued some scholarship, some nonfiction, creative nonfiction, but really turned to the fiction. And then when I resigned from teaching early on, it was so that I could spend all of my time writing fiction. And so I wrote one novel and published that with a hybrid press. And then I wrote Temperance, Flowerdew. And was lucky enough.
Thriller.
Yeah, eco thriller. Yeah. Satirical eco thriller.
Well, I haven't read that yet, but now that I have read a little bit about it, I'm like, all right, I need to read this now. So it's no wonder that you're able to write, because that must have taken an incredible amount of courage to leave your tenure track path and strike out on.
Yeah, it didn't feel like it at the time, but in retrospect, I'm thinking, yeah, that was quite a risky thing to do. But something was calling out to me, and I had to do it, and I did it, and I just kept persevering. I wrote the brief and true report of Temperance, Flowerdew, and then embarked on that slog toward first getting an agent and then a publisher. And all of that transpired within about 2 years after I was finished with the novel.
Wow.
So, yeah, it's been quite a journey. And I still love to write all different kinds of literature, different genres. But I think historical fiction is my niche.
Not that's going to be my next question. What's your favorite?
Yeah, it is. Because how else can you time travel? I mean, it's one of the best ways to time travel. You can read a book about an historical era. You can watch a film, and those are wonderful escapes and immersions. But to actually have to imagine these people into existence is the way I find I most understand and can live in the past.
Yeah. So, I mean, I love it. I've been, it's actually kind of at the beginning of the pandemic, I couldn't read. I was like, well, here I am at home. I have all this time. And then I was like, great, I'll catch up. And I couldn't read. Like, I couldn't concentrate. I couldn't do it. And gosh, now what am I going to do? I can't escape. I have to deal with all this horribleness.
Yeah, I mean, it's so ironic. I have heard this from other people that you suddenly have all this time, at least because you don't have to commute or do whatever you did pre-pandemic. But then something is shriveled in you that you just can't pick up a book and concentrate.
Yeah. Well, on my events, it was like I went through and it was like all my events were canceled. It was like, we have to cancel. And I'm like, cool. It was so depressing. I just went right to bed and put the covers over my head. At the same time, like trying to be so empathetic to the poor publicists because I felt almost worse for them. Like, wow,
I felt horrible for bookstores. I mean, geez.
Yeah.
Not to mention myself. I mean, who launches a book in the middle of a pandemic and lives a joke about it?
You kind of have to joke about it. Like, what else are we going to do?
Right. Yeah.
Wow. So were you able to write? Have you been writing? Because you said it was 2 years since you finished.
Right. Another 2 years of the publishing process. So yeah, I am writing again. Though I have to say, Kim, like you said, you had trouble reading. I really had trouble writing, even though there was all that time freed up to do just that. It was like, how writers go on retreats. It was that quiet.
Yeah, I have my own retreat.
But I find myself just sitting in my chair in my office, just staring out into the yard. And, I guess just reacting to the state of the world. And then slowly but surely, I started to get back into the routine. And yeah, I'm working on a novel now.
Excellent. Can you tell us, is it a historical fiction?
It is not. It's contemporary,
Ooh.
and it was born of current events, and it features grandmothers as heroes. And I'm hope it's a thriller, and I hope it's literary. So I think I'm hoping it's a literary thriller.
Okay.
But
So you'll have to.
Pardon?
You'll have to come to the store for that one, definitely.
Oh, that would be wonderful.
Would be really fun. So you included Pocahontas in your novel, and I know she was around in the same area. So can you tell? I loved her parts where I won't give it away, but there's a scene with her where she does something. And can you tell us how you decided to include her, and like how much of her role was fictional, and like where did you take history and jump off from that? Because I can kind of tell that you must have had fun writing her.
Yes, yeah, with trepidation because culturally I'm pretty far removed from the Powhatan culture and Native American history and so on. Though I did a lot of research so that I could teach early Native American literature in my early American lit classes. But if I'm going to write about Jamestown, I have to write about Pocahontas. I have to write about the Powhatans and all of the major players of the Powhatan tribe. So that was a particular challenge for me because, as I said, I wanted to try to get it as true to history and the culture as I could. But we just don't have a whole lot of information about Pocahontas. We know some of the external factors of her life and where she went, who she married, how she died. But her internal life is really a mystery to, I would say, most everybody. So I had to imagine her. And I know she was the victim, of course, but I didn't want to think of her exclusively as a victim, but as a woman who, at a very early age, learned very quickly how to be shrewd and manipulate a situation to her best advantage because the cards were stacked against her and against her people. So it was great fun imagining her. And you reach a point at which you think, oh, I wish I could meet her.
I know.
This is right.
I just loved it because it did kind of feel like in your book, me as a reader, I was kind of able to meet her and enjoy like so much of history, almost all of history is written by men. So I think that's the part that we as women get a kick out of is these women like obviously are strong and resourceful and powerful, yet they didn't get to write history. We just kind of have to
right. Yeah, and I think you're seeing quite a few contemporary novels or novels written in this period that are historical fiction that reclaim these women.
Yes.
And really it's a guessing game just because there is no historical, oftentimes there's no historical record to rely on.
Right. So this period of time in Jamestown that you're writing about is referred to, it's called the starving time. And you very brilliantly depicted how brutal it was for the Jamestown settlers. How hard was that to write?
Yeah, that was really difficult. I find that as a writer, I like to write about the more positive, uplifting aspects of human nature, but that's not realistic or true. And so I had to make myself do those, to write those horrible scenes and to just try to understand what these people went through. I owed it to them to some extent. So though there is something sort of compelling about deep diving into that trauma and that sort of being bereft of all of the niceties of life that we have become so accustomed to, and to just try to imagine what that could have been like. So yeah, it was difficult, but it was also very fascinating.
Mm.
And I got hungry a
Well,
lot.
it was kind of, there were different times and I'm like, wow, I'm kind of hungry. I wonder if I have any chocolate in the house. Kind of feel like a snack. And just so those watching know, and those on Facebook as well, if you have any questions for Denise, you can either enter them in the chat or in the Ask a Question box. She's more than happy to answer your questions as well. Not just mine, even though I have many, many questions. So Lily, there's a lot of magical thinking and psychic power in the character of Lily. And a lot of it was her knowledge of herbs and their medicinal qualities, but she definitely has more going on than just that. How did you research that aspect of the novel? And just can you tell us a little bit more about that? Why you decided that you would have those qualities?
Yeah, I'm trying to, and I've done this before in other things I've written, but I'm trying to reclaim the so-called magical and supernatural from the realm of the other with a capital O. And I want to bring it into a more realistic setting. And so even though Lily is proclaimed to be a witch, I'm trying to characterize her as an individual with a special talent that has just not been not diagnosed is the wrong word, but just has not been captured in terms of scientific research. And so when she has these premonitions or her hair turns red, she has a knowing, I like to think of it as a scientific phenomenon that we've not been able to explain yet. So that it takes it out of the realm of the dark and the scary and the foreboding, and it becomes a more mainstream part of life. I don't like that the two are sort of separated and bifurcated, because really it's just us not understanding what those aspects of how those aspects of human nature work. I remember Toni Morrison in an interview with Newsweek, I think, was asked about the supernatural, which of course is such a big part of her novels, including Beloved.
Yes.
And she said when she was growing up that she and her family members would tell these thrilling ghost stories, and the supernatural just part of their everyday life.
Yeah.
And she talked about visitations and sightings and so on. That I think that very much is a way to destigmatize the supernatural, and for us to not normalize it, but to see it as essentially a special aspect of our being that we just haven't come to grips with yet,
or haven't gotten in touch with. Because you figure a lot of those animals are in tune with the weather and things, and like when earthquakes come. Because like I remember when living in California, like I could tell a few minutes before the earthquake would come that it was coming. And it was just this feeling that so it's like, imagine how many things that we're just not in touch with.
Right.
That we would be.
And it's still fun to make it sort of spooky and eerie and supernatural. That's always fun because everybody loves the unknown and a mystery. But at the same time, I was trying to meld the reality and the supernatural sort of more seamlessly.
Yeah.
So that Lily doesn't come off as this sort of freakish character, but like I said, a woman with these extraordinary talents who is able to utilize them for the greater good.
And I love the mushroom scene. It's great. So DJ would like to know, how does writing fiction compare to scholarly writing?
Yeah, thanks for the question, DJ. You still have to do a lot of research, especially if you're writing historical fiction. So that's the same in many regards. But I think with academic writing, as opposed to fiction, you really are working out a different side of your brain. You're working out of the analytical, logical, cause and effect part of your brain, more so than the creative side, in which ideas and chronology are not quite as delineated. They're a little bit more scrambled, but out of that sort of free play of thinking when you're writing fiction comes a different kind of order that is imposed compared to the sort of step-by-step methodical work that goes into scholarship. And there's also free play and creativity when you write scholarship, but it's very different from the outset. And I think it happens as I'm writing and going along, compared to the fiction, which comes to me in a sort of a global way.
Wow.
And they're both really very fascinating and fun, and I still dabble in scholarship occasionally, but fiction really is my oeuvre right now.
So the ending, it's a very good ending. Very.
Thank you.
Do you know the endings of your novels when you start writing? Like, did you know with the entire story?
No. I knew what was going to happen to the main characters because I had historical facts to guide me. But
Okay.
I had to do something with the major characters that I thought would represent them so that they would be more transcendent. I didn't know how that was going to happen. And that just kind of unfolds as I'm writing.
Wow.
And ideas come to me, or the characters begin to speak to me. You talk about the supernatural. They really do start to have a voice, and they are insistent, and they don't let me ignore them.
Wow. That's cool. It kind of takes reading, like reading is fun and you don't know what's going to happen, but having your characters just be like, okay, now we're going to do this.
Yeah, and I mean, actually, there were characters I hadn't planned on writing about who just showed up, and some of these were real historical figures whom I had read about, but didn't think I was going to include. And then they started becoming insistent and present, and almost as if they were saying, "Tell my story, tell my story."
It
So
seems like
I did.
there's so much more of the story to tell too, because kind of at the end, I'm not sure whether it was in the author's note or if it was in there, but that Temperance's husband, George Yeardley,
Yes.
that he's actually the first slaveholder in America. And that was really surprising to me. Like, wow, that wouldn't be something I would think.
Right.
Temperance and her family it just didn't seem to fit, but it's just complicating.
Right, and if I ever decide to write a sequel to the novel, I would be investigating that more fully. But for the purposes of this novel, I was focused pretty much on the relationship between Temperance and Lily.
Yeah.
But certainly the issue of Temperance and her husband being the first slave holders or purchasing the first group of Africans was very disturbing. And but obviously another piece of early American history.
Right. Well, and you don't know how her whole experience changed her. Obviously going through something like that, traumatic, going through that starving time has to change you.
Right. Perhaps for the worse in terms of one's sense of how to survive, or maybe for the better. Don't know.
Yeah. What was your favorite part of the book to write? Or was there?
I really liked writing the entries into Temperance's report because I could speak from the first person and really have fun with the language and try to just come to grips with and understand who she was in relationship to this history that so many people know about. So I would think it was the entries. Those were the easiest. Those came the most quickly. And I mean, and then I'd move back to the narrative proper.
Mhm.
But I would say writing the reports.
They're very fun to read. I really
Thank you.
got a kick out of them. So, gosh, anyone else have questions? Very exciting. So, what would be another time frame that you would, or has anything kind of struck your fancy as another period of time that's not current that you would be interested in writing, or do we have to wait for you to watch another show?
If you know of any, let me know. Probably the Civil War. And everybody's so fascinated with the Civil War. Myself included. And I am a descendant of Louise May Alcott. So and I have 5 sisters and 2 brothers. So the same kind of concept is. But I'm really drawn to the Civil War period, and have dabbled in that a little bit, but also World War II. I'm not sure what I would do with that. I was so fascinated with World War II as a kid because my father was a Marine in Iwo Jima, and so I've always wanted to write something about that period, but I haven't found anything definitive yet. Nothing
There's so many different things to write about with it, and I always find, one book I read, and every once in a while I go, oh, I just can't read the World War II book, and then I pick one up, and it's like, Greece, like, who knew what was going on in the Greek islands when during what they were doing and what Italy was doing, and it's just fascinating.
Funny you should mention that because I'm watching a series on PBS called Atlantic Crossing.
I need to watch that.
Yeah, the Prince and Princess of Norway or Denmark. Sorry, I can't remember which one. But what they went through in World War II, and I thought, who knew that? So there are infinite possibilities, but it's true. There has been a spate of World War II novels, and so I'm not eager to dive into that right at this point.
Wow. So, okay, let's see. So this, I'm not sure who this is from. Christian would like to know, does the supernatural presuppose a supernatural being or the laws of nature not being good or both?
Thanks, Christian, for the question. I would say it's B rather than A, the latter instead of the former. I didn't hear the end of the question, though, about the laws of nature. Well, I didn't hear the rest of that.
Does the supernatural presuppose a supernatural being or the laws of nature not being understood, or both?
Yeah, I would say the laws of nature not being understood, though I'm not adverse to entertaining the notion of a supernatural being, because again, we just don't know. But if we call it a supernatural being, is that just our way of labeling something that still is a function of nature that we haven't been able to identify?
Right. And Mary Beth is asking, how much is known as part of the historical record about Temperance and Lily?
There's virtually nothing known about Lily, not even her name. And I would go into more detail about that, except for the fact that I'm assuming some people have not read the novel yet. So I don't want to say too much more about that. There's not a whole lot known, Mary Beth, about Temperance Flowerdew either. We do have some facts, and I worked with as many of those facts as I could find. But it's a very slim pamphlet of information about Temperance. And then, as I said, virtually nothing about Lily. In fact, I made up this Lily's name because she had no name. She didn't even have a name.
Wow. And I noticed there was one of the videos that you did that was put on YouTube that one of Temperance Flowerdew's descendants commented on, she didn't even know anything about her, and she came across your novel. And did you? I was just so curious about it. I was like, wow, that would be cool.
Yeah, I've had about 3 or 4 people contact me and say they're descendants of Temperance Flowerdew, and they're they typically ask me, what do you know? And here's what I have, and do you want to see it? So that's really cool. Though I don't think there's a whole lot more that any of us have at this point. But I think that historians in the future, I hope, will start digging into her past and come up with, just an amount of information will help us understand this very complex woman.
Right. And a lot more is known about Louisa May Alcott as a descendant. So how does that, affect your family and as a writer? Is it like destiny?
It's something that we knew when we were kids. It was just a fact that we were all so proud of. I lived in a household where we all read books. My mother was a voracious reader. My father read as well. And it was just a point of pride. I don't know that at that point when we were kids, any of us had decided to become the next Louisa May Alcott. But I just think that that literary heritage is something that really sort of inspired us, and it has been a role model for us. On Christmas Day a couple of years ago, 4 of my 6 sisters went to, I think it was 4 or 5 of us, went to the latest rendition of Little Women.
Oh, very cool. They filmed that in my town. They used our train station.
Oh.
So it's actually in Stoughton, this really cool old train station, and they took right now it's just kind of abandoned. But when we first moved there, I went inside, and so it was kind of cool. There's the rolling racks, and I'm like, oh my gosh, am I going to be here?
Have you seen the orchard
in Stoughton?
Have you been to Alcott's home?
No, I have not been there. I need to. Lots of things to do.
Got her desk up in her window, and her sister's drawings are still on the wall. It's very cool.
That is very cool. Oh my gosh, this has been so much fun, Denise. I really appreciate you coming and joining us this evening. And does anyone else have any questions? It's not quite as much fun, so I can kind of picture what this event would be like if it was in our event space. We would be having a glass of wine and just sitting around in the leather chairs and chatting. So I'm very hopeful that when your next book comes out, that you're able to make the trip up and
definitely
post about your book. It's such a pleasure. So everyone, this is Denise's book, The Brief and True Report of Temperance Flowerdew, and we do have signed. It was very nice. Thank you for doing that for us. That was excellent. And just click the button at the bottom. Excellent. Right. Look forward to reading your new book and chatting again soon.
All right.
All right. Thank you. Now that you can come back in the room. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.